next
cool.
guest is actually another activist who you probably have seen, maybe you know, Visavjit Singh, who's the Sikh Captain America. I'm sure you've seen him at conventions.
Yeah.
He's, I don't know. Can we bring him on and say hi to you?
Yeah.
You guys should meet if you haven't already, right?
Hey, there he is.
Hi.
What's up?
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yes, I feel like if you have not met already, you have. Janice is like such a powerhouse. And do we call you Vish or Visavjit? What's
you
your
can call me either Visavjit or Vish. Yeah, that's totally fine.
Visavjit is so impressive. He has made a difference, I think, in so many lives just by your activism. So we have to do a panel together again sometime, like in person too. Not that this isn't a panel, but you know what I mean, right? Yeah, so it's so good to see you. It's so good to see you.
Nice to meet you, Janice, as well.
Nice to meet you.
So this is casual, but I wanted to bring him on just because I thought you two should meet, because I feel like some of your viewpoints are very similar. And to me, both of you are the most fearless people I know in comics.
Thank you. Thanks. I look forward to learning more about Janice's story.
Actually, I was talking for an hour. You can start, and I'll jump in.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about your journey, because I want to roll some video, but I may be technology challenged, so let's see if we can go ahead and talk, and I will see if I can figure out how to do this.
Okay, I have faith in you. I believe in you, Amy.
Yeah, no pressure at all, right? Yeah. Well, so let's talk about your story, your journey, and just like how amazing you are. Because I think I met you. I want to say about 2014 is probably when I met you.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out too, because I know I'm like, wow, it's been a while. Of course, COVID has warped our sense of time, so it just does weird things. But yeah, it's been a few years since we met. Yeah, and I'm wondering, was it at a comic festival or
it was one of the Comic Cons, and you had Sick Tunes at that time, and you had that rocking tote bag that I bought, but it wasn't just about
oh
the
wow,
tote, right?
So that is 2011. That is 10 years ago. Yes.
Wow.
Oh, for real? Oh my gosh.
Yes, okay. That was my first trip. Well, either we're talking about the New York City Comic Con, or we're talking about one of the local comic festivals in New York City. So yeah, we're talking 10 years at least. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It was New York. It was New York, somewhere in New York. And you had, and I don't remember, but at a certain point, and the thing I'm looking to show is the 2-minute clip that just to introduce people how great you are.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so you met me at a time when I was kind of going through I had done cartooning for a while in response to 9/11. That's kind of how I became a cartoonist, just sort of confronting people's ignorance and intolerance about people who look different, right? I mean, unfortunately, we have made very little progress, if any, since 9/11 in some ways. And then I think when we met, I was kind of around 2011, 2012 when the Captain America movie came out. That kind of led to another whole chapter where I envisioned a Captain America who looks like me, or at least has turban and a beard. Right. That kind of led to a whole new journey in my artistic path. And I think you and I sort of connected when that was beginning to happen.
Right, exactly. So I actually have seen you sort of metamorphose, and I just sent the link over to Kyle. So hopefully Kyle can show you Captain America if he's got that link going. And you also have a nice 11-minute show that I want to send that link out to everybody after this too.
Oh, are you talking about Red, White, and Beard?
Yeah, which I had not seen. I thought that was great. I thought that was great.
It's
that was called right?
It's really interesting how and I talk about this a lot in my work when I go and do speaking engagements. Stories are very powerful, right? I mean, be it fictional stories or true or non-fictional stories, and how they intersect in our lives. And I never fathomed people are going to respond to me dressed up as Captain America beyond, okay, cool, interesting, whatever, let's move on. But it confuses people in a good way. And I've been to like just all kinds of places, including the most interesting one being the Republican National Convention in Cleveland in 2016. I was there for a few days dressed up as Captain America, standing outside the convention, engaging people who were going in and out, Republican delegates, but not, they were confused, but not in a bad way. They didn't confront me for most part. They didn't abuse me but it did create an interesting sort of juxtaposition of comic images, which led to some interesting conversations.
Because you're challenging people's assumptions. You're challenging people in a way that perhaps they've not been challenged before. And so, Kyle, can you run that 2 minutes?
Yeah, he's got it.
Oh, awesome. Is it going?
I want questions coming out of what I'm doing. Questions popping up saying, maybe, why not, why? It took me 2 weeks before I could step out of the house. Just about everybody flipped us off. They rolled their windows down on the highway and show us the finger. It was hard, just to, okay, wait a minute. So I'm an American, I'm being targeted, and at the same time now fellow Americans are targeting me. So that was a hard thing to process. That summer, the first Captain America movie had come out. I had this vision, maybe Captain America should have a turban and beard, and he's going to fight hate and intolerance. I created this illustration of Captain America. June 2013, finally I walk out and I'm like really scared. Sweaty palms and everything. We get out, people loved it, strangers coming up, hugging me, taking photos. And then, it kind of has morphed more into, okay, now even bigger questions. Do you know somebody just by looking at them? Obviously no, but yet we do it all the time. Even today, you look at our political battles, we judge people all the time. Policy is being formed based on a broad group of Muslims, Mexicans. How do you put them in a box in the same way? How can you put Americans in a box? I mean, there is no American look. Right? Let's start a conversation. Not everybody in the South is the same. Not everybody who's Republican is the same. Not everybody who voted for Trump is the same. Maybe the question we should be asking is, what's your story? And I bet you if we start doing that culturally, you'll find that we're going to really get to start knowing each other, and we're going to sort of start finding things a lot more in common than what our looks might lead us to believe that, hey, maybe, we don't have things in common.
Wow, right? Actually, I am tearing up a little bit myself, so a little bit Ming is going to have to say something.
That was amazing. What when did that come out?
That was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay. And yeah, it's just powerful, and thank you, Kyle, for getting that up for us, for sure.
Yes. We all want to give you a hug. I know, right? Because here's the other thing. I think for a lot of people, whether you're Asian American, people of color, and especially in this business, it's not like everyone necessarily has to represent and do things and be out there. But at the same time, right? I mean, I personally feel like responsible, like for us to co-host this weekend, I thought was important. But it's not like every Asian American comics has to do this, right? What inspired you? Did you feel like you had a responsibility, or was this just a personal thing that you're doing it for yourself, you're doing it for society? What was it?
I mean, when I first, my initial response for me becoming a cartoonist, I was a software engineer when 9/11 happened. 9/11 was probably one of the hardest things I've experienced in my life. I've survived a genocidal massacre as a young boy, just to give context to people. But 9/11 was hard because suddenly I was in a place and space in America where everybody, and this was really, when I say everyone, I mean mostly, a very overwhelming majority of Americans made it be known that somehow I didn't belong. And so that's hard. And I understood there's a lot of ignorance. I get that, but it's still hard that so many people succumb to their fears, anxieties, intolerance, and feel comfortable, use their privilege to tell somebody who looks like me, you know what, go back home, and many other things. I mean, I'm lucky. I've known friends and others who have been killed, punched, arrested, just because they look different, or let's be honest, they look Muslim in post 9/11 America. And so for me, it was a personal response. I was trying to figure out, how do I respond to this? And then I started consuming a lot of editorial cartooning after 9/11. That was kind of like my way of looking at how people are analyzing things. And a lot of cartoonists were responding to 9/11 in interesting ways, but there were a few who were really pushing the boundaries. And there's one cartoonist who I consider him a friend now, but he really changed my life. His name is Mark Fury. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist based out of the Bay Area in California. And he had this cartoon titled Find the Terrorists. It was an animated cartoon. It was on a website. You had to use your mouse. So I know most of us don't use mouses anymore, but it was a computer mouse, and you had to kind of click on these fast rotating images of men. And you had to click on them to find out who the terrorist is. So you click on, there was a Hispanic man, a Hindu man, a Sikh man, a Black man, I believe. He kind of covered all the ethnic groups, and there was a white man, and you got an introduction, their name, what they do, and then you got to meet the terrorist, Joe, who happened to have committed a hate crime against a fellow American, one of the other characters. And the point that Mark was making few weeks after 9/11 is that those who commit acts of hate and bias are also terrorists. Now, that's a very, to you and me and some of us listening to this, might not seem like a profound point in the year 2021, but right in the aftermath of 9/11, to say, imply, outright make a point with your art that if you're committing acts of hate and you're a white person, doesn't matter who you are committing an act of terrorism. That was a pretty profound point. And to me, there's a couple of other connections. I happened to see somebody who looked like me in an American cartoon, not being lampooned, capturing my predicament. That's rare. And even today, I don't see myself represented in, for most part, in American culture, media, entertainment. So for Mark to do that and capture sort of the predicament myself and many others found themselves in post 9/11 America was profound. So that kind of gave me an idea. A few weeks down the line, I started sketching on the computer, taught myself how to be a cartoonist. And about a year later, I started a website called sicktoons.com, kind of like played a pun on cartoons, made it sick. And yeah, it's so it was a personal response. I was not trying to necessarily represent the Sikh American community, but I understood that I was in some ways, because I was creating cartoons and art in America as an American of characters who have turbans and beards, who have long hair, and pushing that narrative, which a lot of us sort of have, is that there's an American look. Which when I ask people, where do you think I'm from? So when I give talks, one of my first questions, where do you think I'm from? And mostly everybody falls into that trap of saying, Middle East, Africa, Asia, somewhere outside of the United States. And then the next question I ask is there an American look? And almost everybody says there is no American look. So then I asked them, why did you think that I was not from here? And then people kind of go like, oh, okay, interesting, yes. But it's just how human brains are. How we have evolved. Our brains are designed to see differences. Our brains are designed to stereotype each other. So I just kind of, but a lot of these learnings that I'm sharing with you, it took some time. I responded personally to 9/11 and how I was being treated, but I realized that I was at the same time representing many others who have been othered before me, with me, after me, and unfortunately still are being othered.
I know now it's Asian Americans are targets of attack.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes in cycles, right? Asian Americans have been targeted for well over 100 years, right? I mean, Asian Americans were targeted when Chinese were excluded from citizenship. And then, things get a little better, but there's every generation we have at least one group that is kind of like the primary group we're going to target. Now you have Asian Americans rising again, but it almost feels like we don't learn from history as much. Although I do feel there's an arc to this historical narrative, things are getting a little better, but I just feel it's so slow that there are days when I feel very frustrated. And then there are days I'm like, I get to do a lot of work with adults and also kids. So I do a lot of work in schools. And so there's one group that gives me hope for the future. It's usually kids. I do feel kids today, for good or bad, we can talk about internet being a force for good or not a force for good. Kids today are more open to diversity in every sense of the word than when I was their age. That's how I see it. So they give me hope. Adults don't give me hope, but kids do. So I'm a hopeful person. But when I see what's happening with Asian Americans being targeted, and now, in the last few days, you see attacks on sort of Jewish Americans, or there's no black and white in this world. There's a lot of gray area, but we need to learn from history. And I just feel like human beings, we're still very tribal. I hate to say that. We all are, and I don't mean to say just the white people. It's people of color communities, and in my own community of Sikhs, Asian American is a broader umbrella. We still have a lot of tribalism, and our challenge is to find sort of those commonalities, and also self-critique, which I feel we don't do very well in most communities. It's very easy to point to somebody else saying, they're committing acts of bias and hate. My focus in my work over the years has evolved, and I really feel like, let's focus on ourselves. The thing you can really change is yourself. So focus on that and be a leading example to somebody else saying, you know what, I want to be like him or her or them or they, because they're cool. They're focusing on themselves and transforming. And I think if you look at a lot of figures in history, human beings who have inspired us, they have one thing that in common is transformation, self-transformation. So I know we just passed a birthday of an American who's kind of considered controversial in certain sectors. So Malcolm X has probably one of the most fascinating stories. And I really believe Americans should read his story because he's very stereotyped by most Americans. But when you read his life story, it's like, what I find amazing is the transformation he went through, and many transformations. To me, that is what I feel we control, and we should really focus on our transformations. If we do that well, society will transform. I think we focus very much sometimes on external transformations, which are not always entirely in our control. So it just becomes a slog over time.
That is so interesting. This concept of transformation, because we see this at, of course, Comic-Cons and comics, the idea of the ordinary person transforming themselves into superhero, supervillain. And is that part of what you were doing, becoming, Captain America? It's like a man.
Yeah, I mean, comics, I, like many others, I have these stereotypes of what comic superheroes should look like, especially American superheroes, right? It's mostly white people, white men in my head. That's what I see. So when I had this vision, I'm like, because I self-project people who look like me in my art, and I'm like, well, Captain America should look like me, or has a turban and beard. It's not a profound concept, but at some level it is, I guess. And how people have responded to me when I started dressing up as one certainly told me, oh, wow, okay, maybe it is a profound concept. But yeah, it seems like a small thing, but in some level it is not small. And part of the reason for that is our comics have come a long way. The narratives have come a long way. They are more inclusive. They are opening the door for American stories to be told in their diverse glory. Long ways to go, but we're making strides in the right direction. But yeah, I mean, at some level, I was pushing that narrative that American superheroes could look like any one of us. It could be a little kid, could be a grandparent, right? We don't tend to think of little kids or grandparents as superheroes, but why not? The interesting bit that I want to share here about American superheroes that are more well-known, the Captain Americas, the Batmans, the Spider-Mans, a lot of these well-known superheroes were created by Jewish Americans who had connections to the Holocaust with their families. Either they themselves had escaped Nazi Germany, their parents had. So American superheroes, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them that have become very big and famous, they have roots in Jewish people escaping persecution at the hands of Nazi Germany. And so that itself is a very profound sort of connection. And then some of these artists actually were hiding their Jewish identity because they didn't feel like they belonged. They felt that they had to live in America as Americans, sort of keeping their Jewish identity in the background and not certainly projecting it in the characters they were creating. But the inspiration for these characters, these white American-looking characters, was coming at some level from Jewish persecution in Europe. So that's another sort of really fascinating human connection that I have learned over the years. I didn't know at the time when I started donning the Captain America uniform that there is a story behind the story of American superheroes.
I have to imagine too, a lot of mainstream comics readers, when they're thinking what a comic creator looks like, we're all in the business. And I think part of the concept behind this weekend is to normalize and say, look, I mean, Janice has been lettering almost every single of your comics since 1974.
Yeah. I get it, I think.
It's like, this is us. It's really become more diverse, and I think it's especially important for my kids. Of course, it's different when my kids grew up with me, so their idea of a comics writer is me. Okay, so I think that's really important that we create that narrative for everyone else. Because certainly me growing up and looking at mainstream media, as you well know, we weren't represented. I mean, the best I could get was Marcy and Peanuts. I was kind of hoping Marcy was Asian. That was as good as I could get, and I'm so grateful for the kids, as you say now have a lot more. They can look to other things, and this representation is very important. I believe. I don't know. You can argue with me. Social media will argue, I'm sure.
I think social media is. I mean, I would not be here. I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't have. My story would not have come out if it weren't for the internet. I mean, I'm a purely computer-based artist. My work is disseminated through websites and now social media. So I would not have really been able to get my work out if it weren't for the internet, really. Because I mean, the olden days when you had editorial cartooning, I mean, you had to go through newspapers, publishing houses, and we all know, I mean, the struggles that many people of color communities had to go through and gender communities to get your stories being told is to go through these gatekeepers who were predominantly right? certain demographics. So yeah, it's been a challenge. So things have gotten better. And we also today, young people, we have social media as and the internet as a means, a tool to disseminate our stories and share them. That in itself, it's so yeah, things have gotten better. But then now the problem is you have the Facebooks, the Googles who manage traffic. And so that's another challenge we have to figure out. But human beings are pretty creative bunch. I don't want to sound like, oh my gosh, this is if I sounded like if I'm talking about certain problems, I'm a hopeful person. But I think going to your point, Amy, telling our stories, creating a space where we all get to tell our stories has to be paramount. Like we have to make sure our stories get told, and we have to make sure if we know there are communities whose stories are not getting told, that we go out of our way to make sure there's a space that's getting created for their stories to be told. Because I know there are communities today who are struggling to have their stories told because they don't have the political, the economic, or social clout that unfortunately at times you do need those connections and networks to have those narratives sort of come out and bubble up.
So I'm curious. I want to get to your story and your a little bit more of your origin story. Like you as a child, did you always feel this way? What were you thinking? Were you reading comics then, and you thought you would this is where you would become, or what? You know?
So I was born in Washington D.C., nation's capital, couple of miles from the White House. Um, First 4 years spent in D.C., Maryland. Then my parents are from India. They moved to India. I spent a lot of my childhood there. I grew up on mostly European comics, Archie's as well, Tintin, Asterix, but not a whole lot of sort of like, I didn't really get into comics that much. I didn't read books, unfortunately, just for pleasure. I didn't do that. I went to a independent school, English medium, sort of did my thing. I just unfortunately didn't fall in love with books until I came back to the US, went to college in the University of California system, had friends and roommates who loved books to the extent that they had bookshelves in bathrooms and toilets. And I just thought that was a strange thing. I thought they were weird. Until I'm like, wait a minute, maybe there's something interesting in these things called books. So I should start reading them. And I did. So to me, books are really something that I consider my first genuine best friends, and they really opened doors for me. So I started reading voraciously from all kinds of genres: fiction, nonfiction, philosophy, history, religion. And that's where, in books is where I found characters who were in my predicament, who were lonely. I mean, I went through an identity crisis. I mean, I'm always a minority, where no matter where I live, no matter where I go around the planet, I'm always an ethnic minority. And so I was very aware of that from the time I was a kid till now, that, I'm an ethnic minority. And so that much, that has influenced my whole life. So I gave up my turban and my identity in college, because I'm like, okay, I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be different. I want to fit in. And a lot of us go through that. So I went through that struggle, and through books, I kind of eventually in my late 20s sort of found this comfort. Okay, you know what? I'm not going to run away from the faith, heritage, culture I was born into. I'll embrace it. Let me just see what it's all about, but I'll do it on my own terms. I won't do it because my parents are telling me that, oh, you're this, you need to speak this, or you need to do this, you need to eat this, you need to. So this is happening 2-3 years before 9/11 happens. And one philosophy and faith that I really was very close to my heart is Buddhism. I read, because I've started reading a lot of books, Buddhism is very accessible as a philosophy through books. So this is Buddhism that came out of Tibet. A lot of the teachers that I really feel who have influenced my life are Tibetan Buddhists who left Tibet because of complicated geopolitical forces in that part of the world, right? So they moved to Europe and the US, and a lot of them have written books. So I got into Taoism and Buddhism a lot before I decided, okay, I'm going to embrace this faith that I was born into, the faith called Sikhism, born in modern day India, that my parents belonged to. And then, I spent a lot of time in California. Then after graduation, being in public health for some time, I moved to the East Coast, went into technology. And then, of course, I donned the turban. After almost 10 years of not donning the turban, I donned the turban, grew my hair long, and 9/11 happened. So I was working very close to New York City when 9/11 happened. So I felt the heat of 9/11, the cultural, the social, political heat very quickly, very hard. And as I mentioned in that little video you played, I didn't leave home for 2 weeks after 9/11 because I just didn't feel comfortable for a couple of weeks too. And this is, we're talking suburbia, Connecticut, New York State, Southern New York, right? We're not talking about red states here. So it was, so 9/11 happens, and, my response through cartooning. And I have been in New York since. I moved into New York City eventually about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. New York New York is something, I feel I've gotten a lot of, so interestingly, I love New York. New York has this amazing history. It's a global city. I love its architecture, its history, but it's also a city where I've been told more than any other city, and partly because I live here, to go back home. So I get a lot of hate online, tons. But in person, people telling me to go back home has happened a lot in my home city, now my home city of New York City. And interestingly, and this is the part that confuses people, most of the time when people have physically told me to go back home, it's been mostly Black people and Hispanic people. Now, that is not to say that white people are also not doing that, but the reason I bring that point up is life is complicated. Human beings are complicated. Our histories and our stories are very complicated. Race and hate and bias is not a white and Black situation. Yes, in America, there's a very big arc and story and theme around that, but we all have, I live by the philosophy, we all have implicit bias. Some of us have explicit bias. We all have prejudices. The difference is, do you know you have them and what you do with it, or you ignore them or you deny them, and then you go on acting on your implicit and explicit biases, right? That's the challenge we're stuck in America, because we're not. So for me, my work today is based on storytelling through cartoons, be it animation and anything else, and creating a space where I sort of talk about my own vulnerability, my own prejudices, and my hope is it'll encourage others to start talking about their vulnerabilities and prejudices so we can have these bigger conversations. So one day, police officers can just come out in public and say, listen, I have a very difficult job to do. I got into it because I want to serve, but I'm an American. I live in this society. I have implicit biases. I fear Black people. So sometimes, when you have fear, you're in a difficult situation. That fear leads to you imagining a cell phone is a gun, or you reaching into your back pocket. I thought you were reaching for a weapon. That is what implicit bias does. But the problem is, we made it into, I don't have biases. They do. And so we don't have that conversation of, okay, let me talk about my biases. So I live in Harlem. So, Amy, this long-winded story is I live in Harlem. And my wife's British. She's of South Asian heritage. And years ago, when we were looking for a place to live and, buy in New York City, the last financial downturn happened and we knew we could afford a house then in New York City. We first looked at a place in Harlem. And I told my wife, I don't want to live in Harlem. And I told her, she's my wife, what my reasons were, and they were biases towards mostly Black people. But this is something at the time I could not share in public because I didn't have the courage to share them in public. It's taken me a while in the last few years as I go out and talk to people to be honest and say, listen, the biggest struggle I have with bias is an anti-Blackness bias, because as an American, that's the first bias that I learned. And then also as a South Asian culture also has this skin color bias that it tells you. So I had a double whammy here. I had my two cultures. I was raised in American South Asian telling me dark skin is not as good as light skin. And so it's undoing that learning. It's hard. It's really hard. So it's like a daily meditation. You have to remind yourself, did I have a thought that welled up that was anti-Black or anti-Asian or something else? So that's the conversation. That's, where I'm at today in my life story, is to talk about honestly my vulnerabilities so we can all start talking about our vulnerabilities. And I'll say the last thing in response to this question is I really genuinely feel what we have more in common is not only the good things, but it's our prejudices, what we have more in common than many other things. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but my experience living here in the US, partly in India, traveling a lot, what human beings have in common, among other things, but one of the strongest things in common is bias and prejudice. We all have it. So let's use that to our advantage. Let's talk about it. And then we go like, oh, okay, all right. We have that in common. What do we do with that now?
That's amazing. That's like certainly glass half full, but you're absolutely right. And I think it takes a tremendous amount of strength to really sort of acknowledge, look, we all have bias in our communities, and we don't have these honest conversations, do we? Right? We don't really talk about, the racism within our communities against others. And also what you're talking about, which I'm also reluctant to talk about with some people, but I think everyone knows this idea of colorism and how light skin is really valued in our communities. And that's also a complicated discussion, how that came about. It really does affect how sometimes our communities react even within even who we marry, things like that.
It's a whole class system, you know, which is related to the skin color.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, every culture has kind of built its own systems to.
I know.
We're better. You know, you're not, and it's there's class.
Even this country is like every country. Like North is superior to the South.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking around the world. Yeah, that's always been in there.
You go to Africa. You know, I've traveled in Morocco and Egypt, and they have their own kind of like systems of how, you know, color gradations even in places like Africa and different parts of Africa. So yeah, I mean, hi Sapal, that's my wife in the background there.
Hey, hello.
So yeah, it's you know, that I think this is where again stories come in, right? As we learn about our cultures and other cultures, you find that there's common threads, both good and bad. And let's acknowledge, you know, I mean, the struggle in America is happening right now. You know, we're talking about the Tulsa massacre that happened you know, many years ago. This Black Wall Street, the story that most of us don't even know about, is that vulnerable space in American history that we don't want to talk about, which I know the majority demographic in America, white people especially, feel like, oh my gosh, you know, let's not talk about it, or at least some segment of it. But I think we collectively should talk about that and many other stories. They're painful. I mean, the story of race in America is a very painful story to read. And of course, you expand that to other biased stories of Asian Americans and Jewish Americans. These are not fun things to read about, but they're part of human history. They're happening today. So we can, if we want to find solutions, we're going to have to sort of get into knee deep into what happened, how much progress we've made. Some things we have not made progress about. And that's a struggle that's happening today. You know, we have some states are trying to pass laws
to restrict voting, right? It's like, what? It's like, where are we, 1850?
Yeah, but you know, people are there is a narrative right now pushing back at, let's not talk about those things. And so I feel comics are a really cool sort of space where you can push that boundary and narrative to sort of keep bringing out. And I know we have now Black Captain America and others. I feel comics is that really cool space where you can just keep pushing the boundaries to go back to sort of reflect truth. America's truth, if you may, deal with the pain and suffering at the same time, but also talk about, look, there is hope. You know, we can get out of this. Let's get vulnerable with our history, and then hopefully, you know, we find solutions and get out of it and break that cycle of hate and intolerance, which I think we can. Although history teaches us that it's like taking a shower, brushing your teeth. You're gonna have to do it every day. Because if you don't do it every day,
and I think it's generational. The lessons learned in your lifetime don't necessarily pass on to your children.
Yes,
because you know part of life is you have to live it, and part of life is being introspective and inquisitive to lead a richer life. Because it is very easy to have like neutral conversations, right? It's like, yeah, I like your hair, I like the color of your clothing, or something positive, and not talk about like what's really under the surface. I think the pandemic, for better or worse, was a great opportunity for people to understand the history of our country, especially through, you know, unfortunately the murder of George Floyd. And before that, my good friend Christian Cooper, who was stopped in Central Park by that woman calling the cops on him, saying this Afro-American man's threatening me. You know, and before that was Arbery. It was like, so basically, there was a captive audience during the pandemic, and that's why this global movement against oppression happened. People are horrified because they can name relatives they lost, friends they lost, generations, you know, present in the same situation about authority oppressing without investigating, or you know, what is a fair hand of justice? Yeah. So, you know, for better or worse, you know, I'm so proud of the people who took to the streets.
Yeah.
Even without being vaccinated, whatever, it was like enough to say no more. We're not going to stand for this.
Yeah.
And you know, I was fortunate in my youth that I was able to participate that way. You know, because I remember when the Asian American movement started developing, I said to myself, "Am I going to regret not participating now?" And the answer was yes. You know, this I had to answer. You know, in terms of my own development. So you know, it's exciting, it's a dangerous, but it's a period of opportunity to raise the level. And that's what I loved about the transformation within our industry, with the younger people coming in, with the broadness of scope they gained through the internet. They're more global than when I was raised in the mid-50s. And what really did it was last president. That's when I noticed people were talking politics. I said, oh, finally, now I can talk. Have like a deep conversation without being isolated as like, what the hell are you talking about? It's still the me generation. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I think with the last administration, sorry to interrupt you, but what the last administration did is it just kind of brought what was already there sort of just out in the open, right? That's all that happened, was just brought it. Yeah, so now, you know, you can, I remember like for years, people used to say to me, oh, Visavjit, I'm sorry you have to go through this, but, you know, this is just a, you know, little thing that's happening. People just were in denial that racism exists in America, or maybe just a little bit. Now you cannot deny it.
It's like,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's in our, I mean, there are people who deny it, but of course we have so much evidence, and, you know, through our phones, through videos, you really have to go out of your way to deny it. So yeah, we're sort of struggling with sort of that space of acknowledging that we have a dark past and present, which can coexist with good times and change and transformation as well. That's why, you know, I really feel storytelling is critical. You know, we have to tell all kinds of stories, good and bad, ups and downs. Don't sugarcoat things, and but create a sort of. We need to. I think there is at times this judgment on people, you know, when they are really getting into that space and sort of speaking honestly and labeling people as, well, you must be a racist. I remind people we all have the potential to be a racist. We all have the potential to be beautiful human beings. Just remember that, because you are one thing today, you could be a very different thing tomorrow, and you don't sometimes control what's going to happen tomorrow.
It's very generous of you, because I feel like some people I know are just horrible human beings, and I'd like to try to think of them in a more positive way. But yeah.
You have to have faith in people, because this is all we got. You know, the Martians haven't shown up. I think they're probably, you know, advanced beings, but we're here on Earth together. So what we can do, you know, it's like, you know, rich people can hide behind the gated communities, but most of us, we have to interact. And I feel really fortunate having grown up in New York City, because diversity, you know, it's like we eat each other's foods. You know, we celebrate the same holidays. You know, it's like we share good times. And
foods, we you know, for better or worse, if somebody's cussing me out, I know I feel comfortable in New York because they're saying the same thing to everybody else. It's not personal.
Yeah.
Racism is not personal in a lot of ways. You know, yeah. Sometimes I feel.
Although I must say, you know, it is painful. It is painful to see Asian American, you know, incidents where Asian Americans have been punched and kicked. In cities,
older people like my age.
In cities like Seattle, San Francisco, and New York, like these, you know, the liberal bastions. So it is painful, you know, and we had an incident in Harlem a few weeks ago. It is painful to see that happening. But again, you know, big cities, very diverse. We have our problems. But yeah, it's a reminder we all have work to do.
Right. So let's talk about the work we can do. What can we do? I mean, honestly, you're doing the good work. What else can people do? You know, because I want to think positively. Sometimes it's hard, right? Even within the Asian American community, one of my friend's mother is in complete denial. She believes all this anti-Asian violence is fabricated. And she does not want to deal with the idea that it could be real. What can we do as people, as bystanders, or, you know, how do we improve the situation? How do we improve the world?
Well, you know, sometimes people who deny it, say the friend's mother, it's a self-defense protective thing. You know, it's so horrific, it'll just like send her inward. So, you know, the best ambassadors are the one-to-one when you're out in the real world. You know, it's like people can join organizations with the same principles and voice, you know, power in the group. But, you know, the one-to-one interaction is what I really relish when I meet people. I never tell people what I do. It doesn't matter what I do. Yeah. Like, so what? But, you know, it's like if you want to judge me superficially, that's your loss. I know a lot of things, but if you're open to conversation, what I've learned in my years out of school, when I was looking for work in factories and stuff, because I wanted to do labor organizing, was like, people are kind, people are good. If you need help, they will help you. So I hated what the media had done the past 4 years, pit us against each other, show the worst of humanity. It's like, here we go. We're going to just show the worst, not what's kind, what's decent. Mm-hmm. So that's the vein I try to plumb and try to grow. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for the worst in you. But if you challenge me, I'm going to stand my ground. I don't back off. That's like sometimes my husband goes, why are you picking fights all the time? I said, I'm not picking a fight. I'm standing here being myself. And you want to push me, you're not going to push me. I'm sorry. You know, it's like, this one racist said, you can't even speak English. I said, what language do you think I'm speaking? Like, what? It's such ridiculousness. And yeah, you know, a lot of times it's microaggressions too, right? You step on that, you know, I was up in Marvel a couple of years back, way back. And then all of a sudden people want sushi. It's like, you know, they're going out to lunch. Let's have sushi. Guess who triggered it, right? Or you're walking by and people just go, oh yeah, we should have Chinese food. I mean, you've heard all that, but it's hard to be angry at the world the way it is, because this is where we are. But, you know, I really admire what everyone here is doing together. You know, there's many levels of reaching people. You know, we reach them through our stories. And you're correct. I'm so horrible. Your first name is that reaching young people. That's the people we're trying to get. You know, like now, you know, it's the older people, they'll debate or whatever or deny, but it's the young people's mind we want to unfold. And what I got to appreciate about our work is like when I started attending conventions in 2009, and I saw people cosplaying, people cooperating. You know, my first convention, being in New York, and my husband and my son Calvin said, get real. You're in a crowd of nerds, you know, nothing's going to happen. It's like, okay, you know, because as soon as I leave my door, even upstate or where I'm going, I'm on alert. You know, your antenna's up, the third eye in back of your head, in front of your eye. It's like, you have to read people to be safe. And you learn that growing up in a big city, you know, how to sense danger. But when it's not there, you know, it's like the golden opportunity to extend. Yeah. It's a skill that young people, no matter, you know, race or whatever, need to learn, you know, for safety. So it's frightening, exciting, but it's a flow period in terms of talking about, you know, how we see a better world, you know, from where we are. And you're correct about we need to read history. Detroit Red, right? When you read his biography, I was fortunate because my sister, you know, got involved in the student movement and organizing on campuses. So I find bookshelves with, you know, Soul on Ice, you know, the autobiography of Malcolm X. So I would just like pluck them, and I was 13 at the time. So I was really fortunate to have my sister set a path where I could learn. Because, you know, at that point there was not Asian American literature, so I had to read, you know, Black identity literature to like understand it.
You were reading Malcolm X. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like you read what's in front of you, and the public library saved me in terms of the first generation born here. It's like, you know, now it's horrible. Now you go to bookstores, I'll read a section, I'll go back and I can read it. You know, it's something you learn when you're young about reading. You learn to hold stories.
Right. When someone had a question though, how can non-Asians help? And I think that you were answering part of that question, right? Is to learn history, learn everyone's history, you know, not just because Asians learn Asian American history, but everyone should learn, right? Everyone's
history. Because, you know, one thing you learn when you do political work is all about allies and united fronts. You know, we have a particular ethnic group, you know, we know the strong points and the weaknesses, but all of us together is stronger, you know, because my contention, I tell everyone, they can't kill all of us. Come on, right? They can't kill all of us. We are the majority, whether they like it or not, you know, whether they do this or that, you're not going to kill us.
You know, one of the things, Sorry, one of the things, Amy, you asked, what can we? So I get as I get to work a lot with kids, and I use storytelling and cartoons as my props and tools. One of the things I do workshops after I do my storytelling session, then I always tell them, okay, listen, you all have a story to tell, and that's your story, and nobody can tell that story better than you. Not even your parents, not even your siblings. So start telling your stories, but whatever be that medium you get to choose, but tell your story in your words. And I think we can start, if we can start sort of sharing that message with kids when they're really young, that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to have your vulnerabilities. Your vulnerabilities is a path to your courage, to transformation, for becoming a better version of who you are. We tell kids, and certainly as adults too, there's something, vulnerabilities are bad things, right? They're just don't talk about them, hide them, right? And that's what leads to so many problems. So we need to raise healthy sort of kids who know that vulnerabilities are these amazing doors to transformation. Tell your stories. You all have the potential to be beautiful human beings and superheroes. So when I do my comic workshops, I'm like telling kids, listen, create superheroes or, characters that look like you or your parents. And start, if you don't see nobody else is doing it, that's fine. You do it, right? You control that art. And who knows, one day you'll be in a position to sort of, powerfully sort of disseminate that work. But it starts with every single kid to tell them you have a story to tell. It's as unique and cool as anybody else's story. And
in hand with that, young people need to be taught that it's all right to ask for help.
Yes.
Because, in popular culture, it's like it's this superhero or this person knows all the answers and this and that. And it never shows the process of vulnerability until where they learn their life lessons, where they have that inner core, the strength to do what they do. That's something I remember. It's like it was shameful to ask for help. It showed you were vulnerable. It showed that you were weak. It's like, well, how else do you learn if you don't make mistakes?
I as an artist, I try to create art that confuses people a little bit. It's a good thing to keep in mind. Your art should, at some level, just kind of make people scratch their heads. What's going on? So once in in our lifetimes, in your storytelling, always, do a few things where you confuse people, because confusion usually leads to, hopefully, exploration. So it's good to experiment. Good, I found myself to becoming an artist because tragedies force me to sort of confront, go choose one path or the other, which is a lot of times what happens. Tragedies are moments of vulnerability. And we are, as Janice said, COVID-19 has exposed a huge vulnerability in human societies. And it's going to bring about a lot of change as well. For the good or bad, we get to control that, right? And I do feel a lot of people are introspecting. They're like, should I really be, I've been doing this job for 20 years. Is this really what I want to do? So I am seeing a lot of more introspection than usual. I do think there's a silver lining. We are going to see, there are more conversations happening. Black Lives Matter, kind of really, the volume really went high with so many things that happened. I think what happened last year is we were all stuck at home, and we were in some ways forced at a higher level to confront what we were seeing on the screens of Black men mostly being killed or shot or arrested. And we could not skip it. We just couldn't go out to the bar or restaurants or movies. And in some ways, COVID has a silver lining to it, that it's forcing us to sort of introspect on who we are and where we are at.
We got a lot of work to do.
We do.
I think if, the more people get involved, and as you say, part of it is also understanding, embracing our vulnerabilities, as you say. And back to the original idea of transformation, I think that's where the hope is, that we can transform. And hopefully that's where our comics lead us to, back to comics, right? As a tool.
It is.
Reach out to people.
And comics are, I have to say about comics industry, it's getting more diverse in the back end and the front end. So I feel hopeful about, yes, yay to comics, it's a great medium, and you can teach yourself how to become a comic artist. You don't have to be born with those skills. You can, like everything else in life, you can learn, put in the time. And I really do feel I have affinity to comics because I've used the comic tools to transform my own life, and I use that as a transformation tool for other folks as well. And yeah, it's comics are, we human beings love stories. We love fictional stories informed by real life. And I mean, I remind people that race is a story. It's a fictional story that was made into a non-fictional story that had such a it's one of the greatest stories ever told, one of the most tragic stories ever told as well. So stories is what we can use to also transform societies for the better, but it's going to require a lot of concerted effort. It's not easy, as Janice says, but I really feel, I'm hopeful, but I do feel stories is the way to go, be it fictional stories, but pour the world with a lot of stories out there, confuse all the so-called racists of the world, and hopefully they'll be like, oh, you know, they're cool. They're like us too. And hopefully, you know, we can get along in the coming years.
See, that's the storytelling where we hope we end with a hopeful note and not the apocalypse, right?
I think we did. I think we
Right?
did. I love your tagline. Just what's your story?
Yeah, we end with a hopeful note, and also I think this is very important. Like, where do we find your stories? Where do we find you? Where can people follow you on social media? Both of you, actually.
Janice, go ahead.
Oh, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, where you'll see cooking pictures.
Yeah, but you're under White Panda, or are you under Janice Chiang?
I put the Janice Chiang because there's this other woman who's
Not Janice Chiang.
popular singer, and then she had her tech friends try to like top my Google search thing. So, oh no, but Twitter was really funny. It was White Panda, and this guy Twitter messaged me and said, "Oh my goodness, I'm a musician called White Panda. He wears a giant panda head, and he said, you have my handle. Can I have it? Because I have music fans." I said, "Take it."
Oh, so
it's
you
okay.
Okay, that's
Yeah, I gave it
That's very good. That's
said,
awesome, Janice.
That's very rare.
That's very nice.
Well,
That's very kind of
I have a myth about being the white panda, you know, being the few Asians in our industry. You know, when I was doing manga, everyone had Avatar, right? So I said, I'll be the white panda. So, yeah, but, you know, I'm the Janice Chiang on Twitter.
You're the Janice Chiang, because you are the Janice Chiang.
Yeah, that's me. You know, because it was really funny because I lettered the Superman Smashes the Klan, drawn by Gary Haru and written by Jin Wen Yang, right? So the first couple of pages, this is a Nazi character, and he says, "I'm the something," and then Superman said, "Oh, that's so obnoxious to call yourself," and then go, "Oh my God, my handle's the Janice Chiang." I'm not, because the other one goes like Foxy Janice Chiang, right? So I said, no, I'm not her.
Not the Foxy Janice Chiang.
No, please. It's like, you know, all the stereotypes, you know, growing up, people will pat me on the head or treat me like I'm cute. It's like, you know, that kind of stereotype of what Asian women.
Yeah, we don't need to, that could be a whole nother panel, you know, but.
Yeah, I know.
For sure.
Especially with the murders
in
Atlanta. Yeah.
So, Visavjit, where can we find you?
Yeah, mine's pretty easy. It's Sikh Tunes. So think of cartoons, but replace the car with a Sikh age. Or the easy thing is just Google Sikh Captain America, and that'll very quickly lead you to my Twitter and Instagram handles and my website.
Because for sure, you're the only Sikh Captain America I know.
Right now, I'm the only one, yes. And I'm trying, you know, I initially, when I started doing this, I'm like, you know, one photo shoot, never do it again. But I feel like there's a power to this story. And I'm like, you know what, until we have so much intolerance in this world, let's just keep using that story to hopefully bring about some positive change. So yeah, I'll keep doing it until, you know, I find a better thing to do.
Well, we need the Sikh Avengers.
We sure do. Yeah. We need the new Avengers with all kinds of different superpowers, and we have a lot of challenges, that Janice said, but you know, we do have a lot of powerful tools at our disposal to bring about good positive change.